Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second official episode of the Your Two Best Friends podcast with your co-hosts, Annalise and myself, Danielle Hanlon. And today we are back with another episode where we are going to talk about consumption and consumerist culture and Annalise and I's journey to really discovering that in ourselves and trying to align that part of our life more with Christ. So we're going to talk about how that was spurred on, why it's something that's super important to us, and why we've seen such changes in our life after being more mindful of it and doing things to combat it.
Yeah. And so, as we talked about last week, how we gave up shopping for a year. And so, in that process of denying ourselves of one area, right, of not wanting to view ourselves necessarily so much as consumers, we wanted to replace that mindset though with something else. And so, we really focused on like, well, how can we be producers in our life? And so, there were a lot of different areas that we focused on. And one of those areas became this podcast. Like we really wanted to see like how can we create in our lives. And so something that both of us really enjoy listening to are podcasts. We do consume podcasts a lot. And so instead of only consuming those, we decided, well, why don't we just make a podcast? Why don't we do use the gifts that the Lord has given us and produce something? And so I think like throughout the episode we'll share a bit more about producing and the things that the Lord has called us to, but ultimately that is what has led us to this point of creating this podcast. So it's been a fun journey.
Yeah, it's been a really great year. I think, like Annalise said, we were really taking inventory of our lives and realizing, holy cow, we consume like 90% of the time we're alive.
Yeah.
Podcasts, whether they're good or bad. So podcasts, like instead of, making a podcast or writing or reading versus writing, those are good things to consume. But anything that's consumed too much can be bad for you. Like excess food consumption, that's not good either. Or things like that where it's like you should consume things, but in moderation. And so when we were thinking about this and really thinking about the character of God, we're like, he's a creator. He's so creative. He creates things. And that was an area where we were not even connecting with the Lord in and really learning that heart of God because it's so ingrained in our culture to consume. So we were looking at those areas of our life. And so we thought, maybe other people would be interested to learn that too. How has it affected us? How can we look at this in culture? We're always going to be part of culture, even as Christians. You're never totally outside your own culture. But how do we engage in that in a way that glorifies the Lord and helps us know him better and in a way that makes us better? Because consuming good things will make you better. But consuming too much of good things or consuming bad things, that's going to go the opposite way. So we want to find that delicate balance, that perfect in between. And so that's what Annalise and I want to talk about today, maybe help you consider and maybe things that you haven't thought about before and encourage you in that way. And so doing a little research, we were finding that people who consume more have a higher rate of anxiety and depression. And that could really be said about all of America. I mean, we're really, really struggling with a lot of mental health issues. And if you look at our consumption, we're number one in the world for most things in terms of consuming. And so those things are going hand in hand. I see in myself sometimes. And Annalise and I, when we were going this journey of shopping, it's always like, if I get that one more thing, if I buy that one more thing, if I go on that one more trip, I'll be happy. And we were trying to fill voids in us with this consumption, with this constant want, with things that weren't for the Lord. That was a desire in our heart that wanted to be filled with the Lord. We were filling it with other things that we really thought the next thing will make us happy. And the next thing was never enough. So we needed the next thing. If you look in yourself, it never makes you happier. It never makes you happier to keep consuming. It really makes you fall into this just this cycle of just wanting and then not being happy and wanting and not being happy.
Yeah.
And so that's what we were seeing and we were seeing ourselves fall into. And we realized we kind of want out.
And so while you're talking, actually, I was thinking about maybe for some listeners, you don't know this, but I am currently counseling. I'm an intern at Life Challenge, which is a rehab for people who are struggling with addiction. And so I am counseling a lot of people who deal with addiction. And oftentimes, when I am diagnosing them with some like their mental illness, it is often that people are self-medicating, that they have depression, they have anxiety, they have these things, but they're self-medicating with fill in the blank, with this drug, or they're self-medicating with pornography, they're self-medicating with alcoholism. And so ultimately, while you're talking, I can see that that can be true for so many of us, that like we have this hole within us, or maybe it is depression, it is anxiety that we're struggling with. And so we're self-medicating with these areas of like, well, if I just consume more, if I just date one more person, if I just buy one more outfit, if I just eat one more fill in the blank, it's going to make me feel better. And often it does at first, right? In the moment, you get that dopamine, right? You are feeling better like after you just ate that really sugary thing, or you are feeling better after you just sinned with your boyfriend, like whatever. But ultimately it ends up leaving you feeling more empty, and the cycle just continues. And so I know with Danielle, when we were talking about consumption, I remember explaining to her that it's like, I just feel so full. Like I am constantly consuming like television, or I'm constantly consuming like fill in the blank music. My mind was like never clear. I just felt so full. And so it was really hard for me to have room for the Lord, because all of my time was filled. And some of the things, as you were saying, were good things. Filling my time with friends, or filling my time with these different things. But overall, it was just like overconsumption, wanting to just like make myself feel really good. And then when that feeling fades, you want to feel that again. So you consume more. And so, yeah, it definitely is a cycle, and it can be really hard to get off of it.
And so when we were talking about this idea of producing versus consuming, we were like, there are actually so many areas of our life that we consume. We were even talking about our quiet time. And I remember this from the beginning of the year, and how often I was like, why do I always feel like I need to turn on music in the background? Why can't I even sit in silence? And
Yeah.
music in the background is not a bad thing, worship music on. But it literally was taking me to this place where I couldn't even like settle into silence or something, because I wasn't like listening to something in the background. Like you said, my brain was so full, it was like even scared of sitting in silence where I wasn't consuming something, and I had to just be. And so it was bleeding into my spiritual life, which it's going to anyway. We are holistic beings, body, mind, and spirit. And whatever we consume, we will feel the effects of spiritually. And people usually, when you think about that, it's like, oh, porn, obviously something like that you're going to consume, it's going to affect you spiritually. But it really is anything. It's TV shows that don't align with the Lord. It's like what you're listening to, that's like, maybe you're not even consciously replaying those lyrics. Your mind is being framed and like shaped, like your thoughts are being put through those filters that you might not even consciously be aware of, just because of what you're consuming. Everything you consume is going to affect you spiritually. Nothing you do physically, nothing you do physically will not affect you spiritually. That's not how we are. We're not beings that can separate our spirituality from our physicality. We are spiritual and physical beings, and everything is so intertwined. And when you start thinking about that, and thinking about that, my spirit is going to be affected, either good or bad, by everything I consume, every amount of which I consume it, that starts changing the way and the things that you want to consume. And so I saw that this year, even just on the consumption side, of being like so careful of the things that I watched or the things that I listened to, because I was starting to realize what it was making me think. Like we were talking about, songs that really like pump you up, or like bad bee energy or something like that we were talking about. They make me feel like, okay, yeah, so good. But it's really because I'm starting to think of myself as like better than people. Like, oh yeah, I am this like really cool person, or I am like whatever, the baddest. And I was like, no, I'm not. Like, who do I think I am? But that was like the mindset that my mind was going to, like being in tune with these songs. And that's not always a bad thing, but it was making me be prideful in those moments. It was making me think less of other people in those moments, inflating my ego. And I was like, why would I want myself to just consume stuff like that and start being that person? It wasn't making me better. And that's not to say you only have to listen to worship music or only watch Christian things. It's to say, maybe think about and take inventory of, what am I actually feeding my soul with because of what I'm consuming physically.
Definitely. And I think something with that in regard to our physical and spiritual life that you really can see within ourselves and within our culture how this affects even the way that we view the church. I think a lot of people um go to church with the intention of receiving, right? Like I'm going to go, I'm going to receive a really great word. Hopefully the Lord speaks to me through it. And then we clock out, right? We're in and we're out, done with church, cross it off our list, instead of viewing our church as this community that we get to serve, that we get to be a part of, that we can volunteer, that we can give to financially, these different things where we are producing, we're creating as part of our church instead of just consuming from the body.
That's so good because we are the body. We
Yeah.
are the church. And so when we do that, and I'm as guilty as anyone of it, church shopping, that term of like, I, don't love the worship here. I like the message, but I'll find a, church that I like both, or I don't really love the pews in this. The vibe is a little off. Like, how often have we done being realistic? I've done it plenty. And with so many churches in America, it's so easy to do
Right.
versus being like, Lord, where do you want me to plant my feet? I am part of the body. I make up the church. I can make change. I can invest here. I should invest here. I should be giving of myself versus being like, I don't like, the pastor's voice, or I don't like how he dresses, or I want hymns versus modern music, or vice versa. I don't really love the style. It's so easy for us to consume church instead of being the church. And so that's something that's really bled into our culture, and we see that a lot. And we're not putting blame on people. Annalise and I have done this ourselves. I mean, we're just as involved in it as anybody else, but you kind of see how silly that is when you're looking at like, wow, church is not made to be consumed. And so it's really bled into that. Annalise and I were also just talking about how it's bled into even our quiet time. How often that if the Lord doesn't speak something to us right away in that quiet time in those devotions, we give up. We, give 15 minutes to the Lord. And like you were talking, sometimes it feels like work. We'd rather maybe go watch TV. We'd rather be on our phones. That's instant gratification, instant dopamine hit. And then turning off that phone and sitting down in slowness, that's like feels almost bad. I
Yeah.
mean, if not sometimes pretty bad. Like my brain is like, no, I need to keep going. Like this isn't, and if I'm not getting a word right away, like I'm bored, I'm out of this, I don't want to be here. And we also view then God as something to consume
Yeah.
instead of being there like, what am I getting out of this about myself versus what am I seeing in this that's showing me God's character? And
Right.
that is like a totally different mindset than when we just go into Bible reading and be like, how do I apply this story to myself? And how often do we make ourselves the main character? How does this apply to me? How does this apply to my situation? Like, how does this story, okay, God, I guess this is what you're telling me about me versus maybe God's teaching us something about him. And it might take longer to get into that. God might want us there on our knees for an hour praying. And that to me, like sometimes sounds like, whoa, that's like a long time. And then I spend an hour scrolling through reels on my phone and I don't bat an eye. So it's not to say that that's not something that it's going to be hard at first, but it's something that it's like when you sit down and think about what's important and then what we can't do because of how much we consume and our brains are so hardwired now to do it, it becomes so silly and so trivial, those things that we give that time to because we chase the dopamine versus being like, God, like I don't want to just consume. I want to be here and be changed and then live that out.
And that is so real. That is definitely an area that I struggle in if I am feeling like I need rest, right? The Lord in his word says to like come to him those that are heavy laden and that he'll give us rest, right? So he tells us to come to him for rest. But often when I need that rest, he is not my first go-to because as you said, I feel like it's going to be work. And so a lot of times I'm like, let me throw in this, like, I need rest. Let me throw in, like, whatever, the show or scroll on my Instagram because it just feels easy.
Mm-hmm.
And taking the time to like sit there and pray and be in silence does feel like work, but it is creating instead of just receiving and consuming. And
Mm-hmm.
so another thing that I was thinking about, that like even in the way that we pray can really show like if we're viewing ourselves as producers or consumers. And so I was just talking to one of my friend's grandmas, and she was telling this story that she was praying for this woman who was a part of her church who needs help. And she's like, Lord, provide for her financially, like going on about this. So, like, props for her praying for this woman from her church. And then she said she finished her prayer, and then she thought, well, why aren't I helping this lady? Right. And so I think even in our prayers, we don't view ourselves as being capable of maybe like giving of our time, of our energy to others and to the Lord. And so I feel like that can even be shown in the way that we pray to God.
Yeah, where it's like, how often are we like, God, get somebody else? Like,
Yeah.
thank God I'm here to pray. And then God's like, you are the answer that you're praying for. And we're like,
Yeah.
you must be talking to somebody else.
Couldn't be
You
me.
must have meant that for the person over. And so I
Yeah.
direct that prayer a little bit to the left. How often are we the answer to our own prayer where God can use
Yeah.
us? And we're like, well, I lifted that up. So my hands are clean. I'm done. With so much with giving, I mean, like being generous with other people,
Yeah.
or being like, surround yourself with friends. I'll pray for friends for you, where it's like, we can be a friend to someone.
Yeah.
And things like that, where we so often are probably the solution to some of our prayers by doing different things with our life. If you think about how much time it frees up in your day when you're not consuming the whole time, you got a pretty good amount of time.
Right.
And you can do things that do produce versus consume. So, what
Yeah.
do Annalise and I mean by that? Producing versus consuming. So, we keep
Mhm.
saying this word producing. And that, like we mentioned in the beginning, was a way we were like, God, like we mentioned, is a creator. That's a part of his character, a
Mhm.
beautiful part of his character. He's really good at it. He finds joy in beauty. Catholicism really talks about seeing evidence of God through the good, the true, and the beautiful. In Protestantism, we really only focus on the good and the true. But think about when go to something so beautiful like a national park, the Grand Canyon, and you're sitting there in awe. That is a way you're encountering the Lord. That's a way that you're like encountering the truth of Christ and the truth of God in his creation, that you're like, my soul just can't even handle this. I'm just in awe. I'm seeing evidence of your glory. I'm seeing evidence of your beauty, because the beauty and majesty that's before me. And so connecting with God on that level of being creative and a creator and producing things versus consuming things is a beautiful way to connect with him, to know his heart, and then to grow ourselves. When we're just consuming so much of the time, again, who does that make us? Even if we're only consuming worship music and only reading the Bible and only like watching shows that glorify the Lord, maybe you're only watching The Chosen, and that's it. It's still you just taking it and taking it and taking, and you're not contributing to the world in any way.
Mhm.
And so what does that mean? That doesn't mean, you have to go out there and do something huge. So Annalise and I were really exploring that this year. In what ways can we do things that we would simply either maybe have someone else do? For example, like my nails. This year, I challenged myself. I love getting dip nails. I challenged myself to really do my own. And I got pretty good at it, and I really liked it. And that's something so simple where it's like, oh, that's not a big deal, save me money.
Mhm.
It's kind of fun, but it was a way that I can just be doing. Like, why do I need constantly to be like, I can't do that. I could never do that when I've never tried. I never, gave myself a chance. And it's another way that I can just be doing things in my own life versus consuming things that other people do. So, Annalise, if you want to try out different ways,
Yeah.
Annalise and her husband are way more creative. They're two of the most creative people I've ever met. Her husband is this really insanely talented wood carver. And Annalise is like, I mean, she can paint, she can draw, she's
Oh
so
boy.
good. All of our Instagram and graphics are Annalise for sure. So, you might be thinking, oh, creatives have an easier time. And so I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of someone who's not creative, how I go into that. But Annalise, what are some things this year that you really were like, this is helping me produce more versus consume.
Yeah. Well, that is very kind. Thank you. And I will say, which is cool, I think being creative is something I always enjoyed, but always felt like insecure in. That people are always going to be better at me than in fill in the blank. And so I think it's important to know, like, this is not about being really good at these things. Like, Danielle has shared with me when she did her first like dip manicure on herself, she looked really bad.
It's so bad.
It's going to take time to even be like proficient in some of these things that you start creating, and that's okay. Yeah. So I give yourself grace. And so yeah, this journey, I guess, for us, for my husband and I, in creating, so I think ultimately he's really good at that already. He definitely views himself.
He already lives this lifestyle, and so
yeah,
he
for
was hard
sure.
to, be like, oh, what did you consume more than produce? Because Alex like lives this out normally in a
Yeah,
way that's very rare.
which is really cool, and I think that has been inspiring. Their family, his family, that it's like my mother-in-law, she will mention that she wants a new table, and then my father-in-law is like out there in the barn building the table. So it is really incredible and inspiring to me. But anyway, so this year I was intentional of cooking more at home, which it still isn't my favorite. Like, cooking isn't my favorite, but it was a way that I could bless my family, bless my husband, but also view myself more as someone who can create and produce instead of just like going to a restaurant and consuming, which I mean, we still do. We still have like a weekly date night. So I'm not like anti-restaurant. I love going out to eat. But that was a cool shift. And I also attempted this year to make sourdough bread. That one did not go well. And
We
so
both had a sourdough phase, which did end quite abruptly. We really thought we're gonna be sourdough girlies. This is gonna be one of the big things we do this year, and we both were like, it's not in the cards for us.
no.
So
It is a child, like, or a pet. Having a sourdough starter is like having a pet, and more power to you if you have one. I like absolute mad respect to you.
It's like a Tamagotchi.
Yes.
Like it's like a fake pet, but it still dies if you don't give it enough attention.
Yeah. Also, my bread was so hard I nearly chipped Alex's tooth. Well, I like really gave myself a run for my money because I also tried making it gluten-free. So, yeah, that was interesting.
To level 100 from 0 to 100 right away.
Yeah. But yeah, another way that I viewed producing more this year was actually working out. So I guess I would say that that's a way of producing. And so it's a way of like disciplining yourself. And so I started working at a gym one day, 2 days a week, and it was hard, but also it was really good to see like, oh, I can do these things. Like, I can push myself. And something that I found interesting as I was like looking up the difference between like a producer versus a consumer at the beginning of this journey was that producers will like, they'll put money towards something, but not just to like gain something like a desire, a want, but they'll put money towards something as an investment. And so they were even, so when it comes to working out, right? Like, that is putting energy and putting time into something that's an investment, like your health. And so, yeah, those are some of the ways. I guess the last example that I can think of just off the, also like writing more. But anyway, one other example that I can think of off the top of my head is like this Christmas season, I needed ribbon for all of my packages. And so I went to a thrift store, I bought a sheet, and I made ribbon out of it. And it like turned out super cute, like this like cloth ribbon on all of my little packages. And so yeah, I guess those are just some examples of trying to view myself more as a producer than a consumer.
Yeah, and I love those ways. I think we both were like cooking more. My husband and I started making a lot more homemade pasta and things like that. And they weren't all because the opposite is bad. We weren't like doing this production like, oh, we're going to cook at home more because eating out's bad. It was more like, we can do these things. These are opportunities for us to really just make something and create something and be people who just do more than we consume. And so we started doing homemade pasta and homemade breads, and we were like, this is so good. Like, you know, and we felt so proud of ourselves, like, versus just buying bread from the store that's really delicious. Every time I'd make a fresh loaf of focaccia, I'd feel so proud of myself, being like, I really can do that. And I'm not really a creative person. So for me, this was a really big challenge. But another thing for me was I had a goal to learn a language this year, and I'd always wanted to, and it's always been a thought. And, you know, I spent so much time consuming other things that I felt like I never had time. And so I actually am coming up on my 1-year streak on Duolingo, which I'm really proud of. Just doing more things like that, and things that
say something to us.
Oh gosh, that makes me so nervous. It's in French. Bonjour. Comment ça va? People are gonna be like, that's not French. I'm gonna be like, but doing more things that were, you know, edifying me, that were edifying my soul, that were bringing more life out of me and helping me connect with the Lord. So, like I said, doing my nails, it's not bad to go get your nails done, but for me, it was something that I'm not a creative person, but it was something I can do, something I can challenge myself, that felt really creative to me, that helped me connect with God in a way where I was like, I really love to have my nails done, and that's something I can do. So really challenging ourselves to do a lot of those things this year, cutting out social media in a lot of different ways to just starve that part of my flesh that really wanted to do that. My husband and I love watching TV shows before we went to bed. And this year we gave ourselves, like, we couldn't start shows till a certain time of the night, like late at night before we were going to bed. We couldn't watch it. That led us to talking more to each other and hanging out more of like quality time versus sitting next to each other, staring at a big screen while looking at the small screens at the same time.
Yeah.
And so it really was like beautiful for our relationship in that way, where we decided we were just going to connect with each other. And then writing, speaking, doing things that was like, we love to read, Annalise and I, and that's good consumption. That would be in like the good consuming category. But if you only read and you never produce, then you're not like growing in those areas. You're not feeding your soul in that way. And so even writing our episodes for our podcast, or just writing little things, really helped me to connect with that part of my soul. And they wouldn't be things I would ever release or things I would ever be like, I want everyone to see. But they grew me. They grew me closer to the Lord. They grew me as a person. And I think that's what we want to leave you with. It's not that, again, consumption's not bad. I think where our culture has taken it, and just the amount that we do in our society is way over what we should be doing. And so it's taking a step back from that. And what areas can I cut that out in my life, even if they're not necessarily bad, just to be someone who does more than consumes.
Yeah. And while you were speaking, I was just reminded of another area in my life that I was really able to see a change. And that was in the way that I viewed relationships, friendships, and moving back, and this is maybe something that we'll talk about, moving back home after college, I feel like was a difficult transition. And I think though I viewed the people in my life as like something to be consumed, like that, like they should reach out to me, right? Like I wasn't putting the like impetus, I guess, on like creating these friendships. I just like expected that they would, like, instant gratification, right? Like these friendships should already be there. Like they should be inviting me to things and like whatever. This like weird expectation. And so this year instead, I was very mindful of like, no, like I'm a creator, right? So I'm going to create events to host people at my house and create these opportunities so that I can create these friendships. And no, I will be a producer of a text message and reach out to these people and share what they mean to me, or like whatever, fill in the blank. And so it even affects the way that we view people. And so I think that for me was like one of the greatest things that I received out of this was like, people are not around for my consumption. Like they are not there to make me feel better or whatever, but like I can make them feel better. Like I can tell them the things that like I see the Lord doing in them. And so I think it really altered that within me.
Yeah. I think also in some Christian friendships, and I'm guilty of this as well, it's like I want friends that make me better. And
Yeah.
you always look at friends as maybe having that job, and sometimes that might not be something that secular friendships just have, or you even expect out of your friends that aren't Christian or aren't as mature in the Lord. But then are we expecting that out of ourselves to give that in return, to make our friends better, to make our spouses better, to
Yeah.
make the people in our life better, or and point them closer to the Lord because of who we are? And so when we change that, we really flip this whole thing on its head. We are the people that are driving, people to the Lord. You can be a person that helps the people around you grow closer to God. As iron sharpens iron, you both want to be doing that. And so I think it is so easy to fall into that of, I want a friend that makes me better and looking for that. And so I think we need to be them. We need to be those people that encourage people around us to be better, that encourage people to walk with the Lord in a stronger way. And we can expect those things out of ourselves when we're growing in those areas, and when we're doing things that actively make us that way ourselves. We shouldn't expect other people to do things for us that we're not doing for ourselves. Even on Sunday morning, we've talked about churches. It's like, oh, we expect the pastor to evangelize and tell people about Jesus. And then my job, is just to sit here and hear him say that. And that's nice. I hope he really saves everybody in the world and does the whole Great Commission himself or herself, because that's so nice that that's a pastor's job, versus having skin in the game really allows you to be fully part of something. And that's what producing and doing really makes you do as a Christian. It makes you have skin in the game of life, skin in the game of your spiritual walk. You've got stock in this. You have a role in your spiritual life. You've got a role in growing closer to God. It's just not on God to just tell you who you are and what you're going to work on next. You're actively seeking the Lord. You're chasing his character. You're chasing wanting to know him better. You're diving into that in a beautiful way. And so, yeah, that's just some of the thoughts I had to end this with. That's what we want to encourage you with. Annalise and I never want you to feel like, oh, bad consumer culture. We're saying this about you. We're just as guilty of it. I feel like sometimes you're going to listen to our whole life and everything. We've realized that we're not aligned with the Lord about ourselves on this podcast for everyone to hear. But if that can encourage you, the things that we've walked through and learned the hard way with the Lord, and you can learn that so much quicker, that's what we want to do. That's why we started this podcast. We were like, other people might not have to take a whole year to learn this lesson. They might be able to start tomorrow. And so we want that for you. We're praying that for you. And we hope that that's what you are able to maybe glean out of this podcast, some areas that you can really incorporate that into your life.
Yeah, I love that. And I really do hope that that is a takeaway for a lot of people. I know that even from having this conversation, being reminded of this year is encouraging to me of how I can continue to implement this year of being a producer, of viewing myself that way. And so, yeah, we are just so glad that you guys joined us for another episode of your Two Best Friends podcast. And we cannot wait to talk to you again next Monday. So tune in. Also, if you are joining us in this journey of viewing yourself as a producer more, like we'd love to hear. Reach out to us, comment on our Instagram, on our YouTube. We would love to hear from you guys. Alrighty, bye.
Bye, everyone.